Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very pleased and honored to have with us today Rabbi Zev Kahn. Rabbi Kahn, who hails originally from South Africa, spent 6 years at Ohr Somayach in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, where he completed the Ohr Lagolah teachers training program, and where he became very involved in college student touring programs. Nearly 20 years ago, in 2005, Rabbi Kahn founded JET, the Jewish Education Team, which is an extensive campus outreach organization in the Chicago area with multiple and numerous programs. JET is one of, if not the largest student outreach organizations in the greater Illinois region. Rabbi Kahn, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Ari, it is such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
For those who don't know, Rabbi Kahn is better known in the Chicagoland area as the Rugby Rabbi. A little bit of background, Rabbi Kahn. Why the Rugby Rabbi? Why are you known to be that? Is that something you want to be known for? And is there any connection between the game of rugby and Jewish education?
Well, I could talk the entire time, Ari, just about that particular topic, because growing up in South Africa, rugby really was my religion. You know, it was the most popular sport amongst white South Africans at the time. And the greatest aspiration that any young boy had was to play for the national team called the Springboks. And I grew up in a city called Port Elizabeth, right on the south coast, played rugby from when I was 8 years old for a school called Grey, which is a very English school. We played against a lot of Afrikaner schools. And eventually I ended up going to University of Cape Town, and I played for the under-20 team and was selected to play for the Western Province, which is a state team. And that just happened to be, b'hashgacha, 1 year before the Maccabi Games in Israel. You know, the Maccabi Games is the equivalent. We're having the Olympic Games right now, which, by the way, a lot more people know about rugby now because it's become an Olympic sport. But when in 1984, at the peak of my rugby career, was exactly 1 year before the Maccabi Games, the Jewish Olympic Games, which, because many Jews were, prevented, from going to the Olympics or representing their country, this was one way of Israel to bring Jewish athletes to Israel, show them the country, and many of them ended up moving and living in Israel. But rugby at that time before that was not a Maccabi sport. That was the first year. I was very fortunate to be picked for that team. Greatest, probably honor in my rugby career to represent South Africa at the Maccabi Games, again, at the height of apartheid. So we actually had to take a different name because according to the Olympic rules, we were not even allowed to be called South Africa. The Maccabi followed those rules as well. But everybody knew we were South Africa, and South Africa was a very proud rugby country. There were 4 teams at the Maccabi Games, Australia, America, Israel, and South Africa. And we played each other once, and then the top 2 teams played in the final. And Australia and South Africa were very, very fierce rivals. And we ended up playing them in the final, and we beat them. We won the gold medal. And I was, so overjoyed. And I tell people, if we hadn't won that game, I don't know if I would have ever gone back to Israel, because I would have just thought about that game and losing to Australia. The entire South African contingent, the Australian contingent was there. This was the highlight of the games for the South African contingent. We ended up winning. And then that really was the impetus for me becoming a rabbi, because I went back to South Africa, got involved with student Jewish politics. At that time, we're talking now, 40 years ago, there was a lot of anti-Israel propaganda on college campuses. I was at the University of Cape Town, and I got involved with what was the equivalent of Hillel's organization called Soldiers, And 6 months later, I ended up going back to Israel to learn how to defend Israel on campus. And right at the end of that trip, the Madrich took me, we visited all parts of Israel, met all kinds of people. Right at the end of the trip, the Madrich took me to Ohr Somayach, where I heard Rabbi David Gottlieb speak for the first time to a group of American students. And until that point, I did not know that Judaism was as intellectually challenging and stimulating as it was. I grew up in South Africa. Again, I mentioned I was a rugby player. I grew up Reform in South Africa in Port Elizabeth. I was very traditional. A lot of Jews in South Africa are traditional. In fact, most of them go to an Orthodox synagogue, but they'll drive there, drive back. A lot of them keep kosher at their home. But I grew up Reform. I had a Friday night dinner every Friday night. We celebrated Pesach and Yom Kippur, but I had no idea of and I was an intelligent person. I studied actuarial science at the University of Cape Town. But that began my journey. That began my journey towards becoming a rabbi, because I came back to Cape Town. There was a small outreach organization there, and I'll never forget going to Rabbi Avram Union, who's now a Dayan in Los Angeles, going to his classes, going to his house for Shabbos, and eventually ended up going back to Israel, going back to Ohr Somayach a number of times, won a second gold medal, 1989. By that stage, Apartheid was crumbling. A lot of my friends and myself were deciding to leave South Africa, and I ended up going to Ohr Somayach, where 6 months I thought I was going to be there, turned into 6 years, where I got my smicha, got married, and took a position in Chicago. And around about that time when I was doing outreach, I think someone was working in the office, and we wanted to advertise a program, and we were talking about it, and we came up with the name, the Rugby Rabbi. And I tell people often, this is a piece of advice I give to everyone, one of my greatest assets, if not my greatest asset, is my South African accent. For some reason, Americans love the South African accent.
We love it. We love it.
And, growing up in Port Elizabeth, you would never imagine, we all dreamed of having an American accent, but you come to this country, I kept my accent, and people love it. But I use it as a way, to put people at ease. They feel more comfortable hearing that accent, and we all need to use those talents that Hashem gave us to make the most of our time in this world, and to make the world into a better place. So I've used that name, the Rugby Rabbi, over the last 20 years to reach students that might not have been interested in Judaism. They might be athletes, and they hear what's a Rugby Rabbi, and they'll hear my story and they might connect. But you asked, does that help? And why Rugby Rabbi? I do actually use my experience as a rugby player to inform my own Judaism, my own Yiddishkeit. And I once had a radio show, before there was things like the podcasts of today, the Rugby Rabbi show, and I would share some of my ideas. So just one of them, and if we have time, maybe I'll share another one or two. But, in South Africa, different to America, everybody in school had to play a summer and a winter sport. It didn't matter what your skill level was. If there was 15 people on a rugby team and there were 300 boys in the school, there were 20 rugby teams. Every single person had to play. So I tell people, Judaism is not a spectator sport. You have to play. You have to be involved at whatever level you are. And that informs, my educational philosophy when I speak to students is, you don't have to be playing at the highest level. You don't necessarily have to be doing everything right now, but do something, learn a little bit, do something for, Shabbos, but don't just be a spectator.
Okay. Rabbi Kahn, you've written as a South African who was raised in the apartheid system, you've written about Nelson Mandela. What lessons can the Jewish people learn from Mandela's march to freedom and or his policy of reconciliation?
That is such a great question, Ari. And as a disclaimer, I left South Africa over 30 years ago, 1992, and I've only been back there 3 times. Once on a spectacular trip with Rabbi Tats, who everybody knows, who's another South African, a good friend of mine, and a mentor of mine in Johannesburg at Ohr Somayach. But it's really a different country. And I actually left before the elections. And I remember I was in Cape Town the day Nelson Mandela was released. And it was a time when a lot of whites were very nervous. I grew up only knowing his name and that he'd been in prison, never saw a picture of him. They never published even a picture of him. So people were nervous when he came out. And I think his lasting legacy to the world is exactly what you mentioned, his policy of reconciliation. He could have been a very bitter, angry person, as many people who have been in prison for political reasons and have later been released will then turn on their captors. And I don't need to tell you, you're a student of Jewish history and world history, you know that all too well. And I think that is a message that people around the world have been inspired by. And he did his best. Like I said, I grew up in apartheid South Africa. Again, we could talk for hours about this and how the Jewish community related to apartheid. And I myself didn't really have any black friends, didn't know any black people. Any black people I knew were people that would work in our garden or worked in our house. It was only later years when I came back to South Africa, saw, blacks and whites running down, on the beachfront, together. And even today, rugby, South Africa happens to be the world champions right now. And when I watch a game of rugby and I see blacks and whites playing together and hugging each other, you definitely see that he had an impact on, the entire population and in, generations to come. Unfortunately, he hasn't been followed by people, I think, who were as, honorable, principled as he was. And the country's facing a lot of challenges, right now. And like I said, it's a different country. If you really want to know what the country's like today, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity of speaking to the chief rabbi, Warren Goldstein. He would talk to you a lot more about Nelson Mandela, his relationship with the Jewish people and his relationship, with them. But other lessons, not resorting to violence when to resolve an issue, having hope and never giving up hope. I always tell my students that one thing about the Jewish people that we've taught the world is never to give up hope. We do so many things in our day-to-day lives and on Shabbos, and we're coming up to Tisha B'Av, we mourn the temple, but we have this undying hope that the world is going to be a better place, that there'll be world peace, they'll get on with each other. It's hard to believe in a world that we live in today that will be the case. But I think Nelson Mandela gave the entire world hope because he himself never gave up hope. And he was humble, as I said, which is also a key character trait of the Jewish people. And I think people look up to him. And I was very fortunate. That in my life, and I mentioned Rabbi Tats, but there were many, many other people that I met that were inspiring to me, that were role models to me that I try and emulate today. And I think we all need role models. Unfortunately, again, in today's world, whether it's politicians or business people or sportsmen, it's very hard to find a role model. And I think that was another thing that drew me to Judaism. And what I try impart to my students is it's not just about the intellectual stimulation. It's not just that I feel that after studying this, that this is true and this is the way to live my life. But you meet people and you live, or you go to people's homes and you see normal people, wonderful people living the kind of life that you would love to live. And so I think that's what he represented. I don't really want to go into his relationship with Israel because that's getting into politics. I think it's not a simple discussion. I know, that he had a good relation with the Jewish community, not so much, with Israel. I'll leave that to the historians, to discuss. But in my mind, at least, I think there are lessons to learn from his personal journey.
As you deal with and encounter young people, do young people today have a sense of history, Jewish students, a sense of Jewish history? And what are the Jewish students that you encounter? What are they looking for today? What are they searching for? And how do they want to contribute to society and to the Jewish journey in history? It's a lot of questions there. So,
all of these questions are questions I think about a lot. I get asked a lot. And I'll take that first question because, first of all, I was so impressed when I saw your website and all the amazing people that you've had on your website. I was very fortunate. I was immediately drawn to your interview with Beryl Wine. I was very fortunate. You mentioned the Ohr Lagolah program, which is a 2-year training program at Ohr Somayach. We had the good fortune of hearing some of the greatest teachers in the Jewish world, Rabbi Zev Kahn, I mentioned Rabbi Tats, Rabbi Gottlieb, but I also had the pleasure of hearing Rabbi Beryl Wine talk about Jewish history for literally 2 years, and it was absolutely fascinating. So in South Africa, Jewish history, but history in South Africa in apartheid years was a very linear history and not that exciting. I was not really a good history student, but Jewish history is just remarkable. It's just amazing. And when you have a teacher like Rabbi Beryl Wine, you can really learn a lot. So the answer to your first question, I don't think this is just about young people. I think it's everyone today. Their sense of history doesn't go back very far. For young people, it doesn't go back more than, a day or two, because there's so much going on in the world. There's so much changing that something that's more than 2 days old is like ancient history. The news cycle changes so quickly. And I think also, we can talk about this a lot, social media has really changed the world completely. And so people's, and the internet in general, but their source of news and their source of history, is not coming from traditional sources. They might not be getting really the true sense, of what history is about. And I think it's unfortunate because history is what, informs us for the future. And we learn so many, many lessons from history, but it also is something I tell our students. I'm sure we're going to get to talk about intermarriage and the scourge of intermarriage on the Jewish community. But I will tell students, before you make a decision about your future life, look into your past, look into your history, look into the heritage that you have, and then make an educated choice. People often ask me, our organization, JET, like you mentioned, Jewish Education Team, our mission is to educate Jews so that they can make educated choices. And part of that is history and learning what our history is. I'm not just talking about the last, 75 years of the, modern Arab-Israeli conflict. That conflict goes all the way back, to Avram and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael. And when you learn those lessons, it informs you of, the current situation. It is a complicated history. I'm not saying it's easy, and there are different points of view, but knowing the history is the first step in trying to deal with the world today. But the answer is that's the reality. The reality is that young people today do not look back; they look more forward, and so you have to just deal with that. So you asked me, what are Jewish students looking for today? And I think that's a debate. People will say that in the aftermath of the 6-Day War, and everything that was going on in the world in America, there was an awakening, and people were searching for meaning in life and truth, and people would travel the world, to find that truth, and many of them would end up in Israel at the Kosel, at the wall, and be taken off to a Jewish class, and they would get involved with classes, and they would have intellectual discussions with the likes of people at places like Aisha Torah, with a Moti Berger or Ohr Somayach, Rabbi David Gottlieb, and that I think is very true. I still think that is the case today. I think when people are engaged intellectually, they do look for the truth. So I don't want to say that is not something that young Jewish people are looking for, but I think there's a lot more that they're looking for. And again, whether it's social media, whether it's 9/11, whether it's COVID, I grew up in a very sheltered environment in South Africa, even with apartheid and the violence that was going on maybe around me, but not personally affected me. But I grew up in a very, very protected world. And I think students, young people today, not only young people, but that's who I work with, are in a very different world. I think they're very scared. I think whatever it is, whether it's terrorism, or it's the climate, or it's even whatever it is, and I think they're looking for comfort. I think they're looking for security. I think they're looking for some meaning in a crazy world, and I think organizations like JET and just for people who don't know, everyone's heard of Hillel, everyone's heard of Chabad. And maybe some people have heard of Aisha Torah, Ohr Somayach, or some of these other outreach organizations. Today, all these organizations are under an umbrella organization called Olami, which is in countries all over the world and on campuses all over America. And JET is an affiliate. So, Ari, you could speak to outreach people all around the country, and you might find different answers, and maybe you'll get a chance to do that sometime. But what JET tries to do, and we have a fairly small building down in Champaign at the University of Illinois, where there's about 5,000 students. Our goal, our mission, is to provide a home away from home, but a real home. So we have a young couple down in Champaign that hosts people for Shabbos, invites people over for classes, that kind of thing. What we're trying to do is model for them what a Jewish home is like. And so we won't have 100 people. We'll have 5, 10, 20 people at a Shabbos table. We want them to experience a Jewish home. But what I think it also does is it creates for them a safe space, a place where they can really feel safe. And that is a big thing today on college campuses. We can talk about that also. I've spoken to students down in Champaign. There's no physical danger like there has been on other campuses, but they definitely feel intimidated and threatened. And I think there's always been anti-Semitism on college campuses. I mentioned to you in South Africa 40 years ago, there was anti-Semitism on campus. I think we all know that what happened over the past 7 months and will probably continue is not going away. Once it's out of the bottle, I don't think it's going away. The question is how we deal with it. One way that JET deals with it, and our couple down in Champaign, Shmuel and Jackie House, who are really spectacular, they provide a safe space for some of these students. So again, to answer your question, I think people are still searching for truth, and they'll find it in the Torah. But I also think they're looking for safety and comfort.
Rabbi Kahn, as one you had mentioned that you had studied actuarial science, statistics. Yes. That's statistics, the numbers. As a scientist in that field, how do you interpret the continuing high rate of intermarriage from a statistical viewpoint? And is that really irrelevant today is that we shouldn't even look at that. Perhaps the war is lost and it's not about the war anymore. It's about the battles that we pick and choose, that great organizations like yours picks and chooses, and forget about the war itself.
Yeah, another great question. I'm not an expert, and I will tell you that having majored in statistics at the University of Cape Town, I do not trust a single statistic that I read, because, as you know, statistics are based, on many different factors, and very often on the question that is asked. So when you hear, a statistic of intermarriage, 70% intermarriage, so I don't know how accurate that is. And even, for example, according to Jewish law, if a Jewish woman marries a Jewish man, even though that's an intermarriage, but the children are Jewish, and so it has to be really understood, what that number really represents. And even in the most recent Pew study, there were many commentators, people who not only study statistics, but went on to work in that field for many years, who questioned a lot of the premises that they based that study on. However, whatever the number is, it's much too high. And not only that, but it's climbing, and it's been around for a long time. That these studies that have been made, obviously there was a lot of people know about a famous chart that a good friend of mine, Kanan Gordon, put out with his good friend, I think Dick Horowitz in Los Angeles, that showed what happens when you have high intermarriage rates and what happens to the Jewish population over just a few generations. But if you have a high intermarriage rate over 25 years, it has to have an impact on the Jewish community. And so I think today, even my own experience, even in the last 20 years, when we did a program, our flagship program was a program called Maimonides. It was founded by probably one of the fathers of Jewish outreach, Rabbi Avram Jacobowitz, out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. After that 10-week program, we found, when we tracked students a couple of years later, that almost none of them intermarried. But that's not the case today. And I think the reason is because intermarriage is so widespread that it's no stigma today to intermarry. In fact, if anything, you appear more to be a racist if you will only date someone, Jewish. And so there's almost like a stigma to marry someone Jewish, in some respects. So it definitely has made an impact. It also makes it harder as a person who's doing outreach to find out who the people are on campus that are actually Jewish. And we will take people in who think they are Jewish, even they might not be halachically Jewish, but even those people, if they didn't grow up in a Jewish home, or with both parents Jewish, and they weren't taught Jewish values, so then they're not even walking in our doors. Out of the 5,000 students at the University of Illinois, maybe 10% of them will get involved with either Jet or Hillel or Chabad. But as one of my mentors, someone you should definitely have on your program one day, Rabbi Avram Edelstein, who was very close to Ramea Schuster, another great figure in the outreach world, founder of Heritage House. Rabbi Edelstein worked very closely with Mayor Schuster, and when so many people were searching and coming into the Heritage House, he is now one of the main educators at Novei Yerushalayim, which is a seminary in Yerushalayim that my wife went to, and has produced many thousands of students. But Rabbi Avram Edelstein said to me, and by the way, he wrote a fascinating book called The Halachas of Outreach, because it's quite a big field. But he told me that it doesn't matter what the rate of intermarriage is. It doesn't matter how hard it is to find any Jews. It doesn't matter how interested they are or how not interested they are. But our job is to find every single Jew that's out there that's interested and bring them back to Avinu Shebashamayim, their Father in heaven. And my wife and I's personal philosophy is that it's one neshama at a time, one Jew at a time. And there's simply not enough people doing outreach to reach all the students that are interested. So people will ask me, what do we need another organization on college campuses for? We've already got, a couple of other organizations. And I tell them we should have 10 organizations on every campus, because one's going to like this person or that person, or a big crowd or a small crowd, or they like, whatever they have to offer. Our biggest competition is video games and, sports and everything else that students are busy with. And every single neshama that we bring back is a success. In fact, any student that comes to a single class, a single Shabbos meal is a success, because you don't know what impact that's going to make. But our job is never over, Ari. It's going to continue until Be'ez Hashem Mashiach comes, and we can't be put off, not by the statistics of intermarriage or the interest level of people, because it's too important a job. Look, we all know that not every Jew came out of Mitzrayim, came out of Egypt. Only, according to one opinion, only 20%, according to one opinion, 2%. I don't know how many people are going to come back when, by the time Mashiach comes. It would not surprise me if it's only, that small number. But every single neshama that comes back is not just one neshama, really, because fortunately, when you've been in this field for 20 years, we don't stop once they come in the door, once they go off to yeshiva or seminary and get married. We follow them through that process, and we are very fortunate. We have married couples who had children, who've celebrated bar mitzvahs, and please God will marry off their children, that we continue. And then you're talking about generations of people after you, that are going to make a difference in the world. So I hope that answered.
Absolutely. We've heard on different podcasts that there seems to be actually a lack of highly trained Jewish educators in North America, even on the top levels, whether it's principals of certain schools. And you had mentioned now, Rabbi Kahn, we need more outreach people and organizations. Is there a lack you're finding even on the college campuses in terms of outreach? Are there new training programs that are being set up? Is it just not an attractive space to be in?
Well, again, Ari, I have to commend you. You got some great questions. And, on a separate topic, maybe you'll even have my wife on one day, because she's a shadchan for a great organization called Ohr. She says there's no shidduch crisis, there's a shadchan crisis. We really need more people to be involved in matching people up. And I just, again, getting back, I'll get back to a question in a moment. But people who do become balei tshuva, especially older, really do need people to help them find their mate. And I would say like this, I'll talk specifically about outreach as a profession, and then I'll mention that there's many more people that can get involved. I mentioned that I'm part of Ohr Lagolah, and Ohr Lagolah over the last 10 years, but even longer than that, have training programs, and they are very, very much on the front line of outreach, and they have noticed and seen that it's not easy to find people to go into this field. Now, I work in Chicago. I live in West Rogers Park. I live in a very supportive community. We sent our children to, schools and yeshivas, Beis Yaakov's here in Chicago. For me, this is my life, my wife and I's life mission. We're going to, Be'ez Hashem, continue this for the rest of our lives. But to go off onto a college campus and to spend a couple of years on a college campus, which is a pretty lonely job, there's not so many other people to support you, not too many people for your kids to play with. It's not a long-term career for most people. And like I said, it's quite difficult, but there are many people who are idealistic, who are inspired, and we're not talking about only Balei Tshuva. You know, one of the reasons I went into this field myself is how can I ever pay back all those families that had me for Shabbos back in South Africa? Can't invite them to my Shabbos table, even if they lived, in Chicago, couldn't fit them all in. But my teachers, everyone that had an impact on me. So the way I pay them back is I pay it forward, and I want to, give people who didn't have a Jewish education that opportunity to get that, that education. But if you're living in a place like whether it's New York or Los Angeles or some of these big cities, you can become an outreach professional and still raise your family from community. So again, if you speak to the head of Ohr Lagolah and you had to ask him, he would give you a better idea of what that field looks like today. Look, it's also, I think, cost of living is higher. So, do you take a job that is typically not that well paid necessarily, and you know that it's only a limited time? How long can you stay in that field? But Ohr Lagolah has done something which you've obviously know about Partners in Torah. That's been around for a long time, but Ura's got Torah mates. I think Aisha Torah's got something as well. What Ohr Lagolah has tapped into is the tens of thousands of people just like you, Ari, and just like anyone that lives in any Orthodox community that has non-religious or not yet religious, as we'd like to say, Jewish people who are also looking to grow and to find meaning in life. And so Ohr Lagolah has tapped into that vast resource. And the job of someone like myself is to bring them in the door, and then Ohr Lagolah will set that student up with a mentor. They'll learn today one of the advantages, talk about social media, but one of the advantages of the world we live in today is you have something like Zoom. So you can have someone who's a doctor in, Connecticut, who's learning on the phone with a doctor or on Zoom with a doctor in Chicago. And then they develop a relationship and they can really grow, sometimes more than with a rabbi, because they can relate to them because of the field that they're in. So I do think that the future of outreach is bright. A lot of people have questioned over the last number of years, is there still a window of opportunity that's open to do outreach? And like I've said, the answer is yes. And not only that, but I think there's more opportunity, because I think that there are tens of thousands of people out there that are good enough, don't have to go through a 2-year training program. What is more than anyone else out there. And it takes a little bit of courage because people unfortunately have got a negative view of not just the Jews, but of Judaism, and particularly Orthodox Judaism. But you show a little bit of love and a little bit of care, and you listen to their questions, and you will probably be able to answer most of them. And if you don't, there's lots of resources online and people you can speak to. But I think that if a person is interested, they can go to any number of places and get involved in outreach.
I think you've asked a question that we ask very often, which is, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or somewhere in between? So if I'm hearing correctly, it is optimistic or hopeful.
Right. I mean, we are a Jewish people. We have been filled with hope, and we understand also when you're in outreach, you know that Hashem is on your side, and you can speak to any Makarav, any person involved in outreach, and they will tell you that as a Makarav, we play such a small part in each person's journey. And I'm not talking about the fact that you can have someone over for a Shabbos meal, or you take them on a birthright trip, or you take them on a trip to Israel and they get started. But there's so many other people, whether it's families or rabbis or other peers that influenced them over the years. But more than that, every single story is like a miracle. I tell people I think it's a miracle that anybody's Orthodox today in the world that we live in today. But you hear the stories of how people get involved. I remember, just as an example, meeting a student on walking across the quad in Champaign, who had absolutely no Jewish education whatsoever, and I happened to bump into him, and I invited him for a Shabbos meal. He's now married with I think a couple of kids, living in Israel, living a full Jewish life. And it was I don't call it by chance, it was obviously hashgacha that I met him, but every single story is like that. So when you know that you've got Hashem on your side, you know that we are coming close to, the times of Mashiach. Anyone that's got eyes in their head can see that, the way the world is going, Mashiach is just around the corner. That inspires you more. But we know that Hashem is on our side, and He wants His children back more than anyone, more than we do. So definitely, you have to be optimistic.
Yeah. Again, I think it's best to leave it on that note, on an optimistic Mashiach note. Again, Rabbi Kahn, thank you so much for your insights and inspiration, and you and the Jet team should continue to go from strength to strength, from chayil to chayil. Thank you very much.
Well, Ari, thank you very much. And you are considered a part of the Jet team, the last letter in our organization, Jewish Education Team. I tell everyone, I might be on the front lines, but it takes a village. We live in a fantastic Jewish community, but you are now a part of the Jet team. And I give you a bracha also, that you should continue in good health, to continue doing what you're doing, and inspire, all of us. We all need inspiration, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.